The night her ex-boyfriend laughed at her, in front of 40 people, Stella had flour on her apron and a coffee stain on her left shoe, and she was carrying a birthday cake for a table of strangers. She remembered thinking, even in that exact moment, even while his laughter was still bouncing off the exposed brick walls of the restaurant, that she should have worn the black dress. The good one, the one still hanging in her closet with the tags on, because she could never find the right occasion. This was the right occasion. She just hadn't known it in time. His name was Preston, Preston Hale, the kind of man who had a middle name he used at parties, and a handshake that lasted exactly 1 second too long. They had dated for 2 years, lived together for 7 months, and she had ended things 14 months ago when she found out he'd been telling his friends she was temporary. Not in a cruel way, he'd explained when she confronted him. Just honestly. She wasn't really the kind of woman he saw himself with long-term. She was great, he'd said. Just not quite right. She'd packed her things in 3 trips and never cried in front of him. She was proud of that. She'd done all her crying in the parking lot of the pediatric clinic, where she worked 12-hour shifts, using the scratchy brown paper towels from the staff bathroom, alone. That was Stella Marsh, always alone when it mattered. Now she was 29 months out from Preston Hale, standing in the private dining room of Lakeview Grill with a chocolate ganache birthday cake balanced in both hands. And he was sitting at a table near the window with 6 of his friends, including 2 people she recognized, and he was laughing. Not at her yet. But then he turned, and there was that fraction of a second, that tiny, suspended moment where she saw him clock her, recognize her, and make a decision fast the way men like Preston always made decisions, what would play best to the audience. "Stella," he said. Loud enough that heads turned. She kept walking toward table 9, just kept her feet moving. "Stella Marsh?" Louder now, with a kind of delighted disbelief, like she was a punchline he'd almost forgotten. You're a waitress now?" She set the cake down on table 9. A woman turned 60 was beaming at it, reaching for her husband's hand. Stella lit the candle and smiled and said, "Happy birthday, Mrs. Alderton," and did not look back at Preston Hale, but she could hear him. She was a pediatric doctor. He was telling his table in the performative whisper men like him used when they wanted everyone to overhear. Like actual MD. Wild, right? Life comes at you fast. His friends laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Stella walked back through the dining room with her chin level and her hands steady and her heart doing something horrible in her chest. She pushed through the kitchen door. She stood with her back against the stainless steel shelving and breathed in the smell of garlic and butter and dish soap and breathed out everything else. This was her restaurant. Well, not hers. Not the way Preston would understand ownership. But she'd worked here for 4 months, ever since the clinic restructured, and she lost her position in the layoffs, and she'd needed something immediate, something that paid, because she had a 4-year-old daughter at home and rent due the 1st of every month, and no one was coming to save her. She'd picked up the job the same week she'd passed her interview at Northgate Pediatric Group. She'd start there in 6 weeks. She hadn't told anyone except her mother and her babysitter because she was tired of explaining herself, tired of the particular pity that came with being a single mother in her early 30s whose career had briefly, publicly stumbled. Preston didn't know any of that. Preston still thought he knew exactly what she was. She tied her apron tighter, picked up a water pitcher, and walked back out. The man at the corner table had been there for 40 minutes and had ordered only a glass of water and a side of bread. Stella noticed him the way she noticed most things, quietly, peripherally, while doing 12 other things at once. He wasn't trying to be noticed. That was what caught her attention. Most people who sat in corners at nice restaurants were either waiting for someone or wanted to be seen not wanting to be seen. He was neither. He looked like he was simply there, taking up a small amount of space and paying a great deal of attention to the room without appearing to pay any attention at all. He was somewhere in his late 30s, dark jacket, no tie, hands on the table, very still. She refilled his water without asking. He thanked her without looking up. She was on her way back from table 12 when Preston intercepted her. He'd gotten up from his table. She could see his friends watching with the relaxed interest of people at a zoo, and he was standing in the middle of the dining room with that smile, the one she used to find charming, the one that meant he was about to say something he'd already rehearsed in his head. "Hey," he said, "I didn't mean to be a jerk back there." "You're fine," she said, and tried to step around him. He moved with her. "I'm serious. I was surprised. I didn't realize you were." He gestured vaguely at her apron. "You know, going through a thing? I'm not going through a thing, Stella." He dropped his voice. Gentle now. Concerned. The most dangerous version of Preston. "You don't have to pretend. I know things got hard after the clinic. I heard about that. I'm sorry. That's rough." "I appreciate that," she said. "Can I get you anything?" He glanced back at his table. "I want you to know if you need anything. References, contacts, whatever. I still know a lot of people in the medical field. I'm happy to make some calls." There it was. She could see the full shape of it now. This would be the story he told afterward. How he'd run into his ex, who was struggling, and he'd offered to help. How he was a good guy, really, at heart. "I don't need anything," she said. "Thank you, Preston. You're sure?" He had the expression of a man who wanted to be refused so he could feel generous anyway. Positive. She turned away. She had a kid, by the way. She heard him tell his table, not bothering to lower his voice anymore. "Few years ago, I think the dad's not in the picture. It's really sad." She kept walking. She walked past table 7, past table 4, all the way to the corner, where the man with the dark jacket was eating his bread and looking out the window at the street. She set down a fresh bread basket she didn't have a reason to deliver and stood beside the table for half a second longer than was necessary. "I'm sorry about that," she said, not really sure why she was saying it. "That was unprofessional. It won't happen again." He looked up. She'd prepared herself to see pity. She was very used to pity at this point. He wasn't pitying her at all. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately place, focused, quiet, the way someone looked at a problem they found genuinely interesting. "You handled that well," he said. She almost laughed. She actually almost laughed, standing in the middle of a dinner shift with flour still on her apron. "Thank you," she said instead, which seemed like the safer choice. "Is he a regular?" "First time, hopefully last." He went back to his bread. She went back to her tables. His name was on the reservation, corner table, 7 p.m., party of 1, Roman Cahill. She didn't think anything of it that night. He came back the following Thursday. Same table. Water, bread, and this time an entree, the salmon, which he ate about half of before pushing the plate aside and going back to looking at his phone. Or not looking at his phone. She got the sense he was doing something else, something that only appeared to be looking at his phone. "You're back," she said, refilling his water. "Is that a problem?" Not at all. She started to move away. "The salmon's good," he said. "Better than I expected." She turned back. "Our chef used to work at a place in Charleston. He has a way with fish." Roman Cahill looked at her for a moment. "How long have you been here?" 4 months. "Do you like it?" It was an odd question for a restaurant from a customer on a Thursday. She considered lying the reflexive social lie that kept everything smooth and easy. "Some nights," she said honestly. He nodded like that was the right answer. Over the next 3 weeks, he came in 6 times. Always the corner table. Always the same quiet attention to the room. He tipped extraordinarily well. Not in the showy, look-at-me way, but consistently, like he'd done the math and landed on a number that was correct and fair. She learned small things. He was from the city originally, but had been in Europe for several years. He didn't make small talk in the usual way. He asked real questions and listened to the answers with an intensity that was disarming, because most people asked questions while already mentally composing their own response. He had a way of being still that she found, gradually, calming. She did not think about the fact that she found it calming. She had other things to think about. Her daughter Piper was in preschool and going through a phase of absolute refusal to wear socks. Stella's mother kept calling to ask when she was going to get herself sorted. The clinic's start date was 3 weeks away, and she'd already mentally mapped the drive 4 different ways to figure out which was fastest at 7:15 a.m. She had a leak under the kitchen sink that her landlord had promised to fix for 6 weeks. She was managing. She was always managing. Preston came back once more, a Tuesday, with a date this time. He made sure to walk past Stella's section twice. His date was pretty and young, and seemed genuinely nice, which made it worse somehow, and Stella refilled their water glasses with the cheerful competence of someone who had quietly decided that water glasses would never be her undoing, and went on about her night. After his table left, she was clearing the dessert plates when she realized Roman had been there the entire time, quiet in his corner, and that she had no idea how much he'd seen. She didn't ask. It happened on a Friday in October. She'd taken Piper to the restaurant with her for the last hour of setup before service because her babysitter had canceled and her mother couldn't get there until 6, and she had no other option. Piper was 4. She was well behaved in the particular way of children who sense when something is genuinely needed from them, and she sat in the back booth with her crayons and her dinosaur book and was, for 45 beautiful minutes, completely fine. Roman arrived at 7. Piper had migrated to the end of the corridor near the wait station, a dinosaur clutched in one hand, watching the dining room with the solemn curiosity of a scientist observing a new species. Stella had meant to move her back, but it was 7:05, and Table 3 had already sent back an appetizer. She didn't see Roman stop in the corridor until she was coming back from the kitchen. He was crouched down to Piper's level, which was such an unexpected thing for a man in a good jacket to do on the floor of a restaurant corridor that Stella stood very still for a second, watching. "That a Stegosaurus?" Roman was saying. "Ankylosaurus," Piper corrected, very seriously. "Different tail, right. Of course." He looked genuinely chastened. "The club tail." Piper stared at him. Stella watched her daughter evaluate this man with the complete unself-consciousness of a 4-year-old deciding whether or not to like someone, and then Piper held out the dinosaur. He accepted it with appropriate gravity. Stella came forward. "She's mine," she said, which was a strange thing to say, but Roman didn't make her feel strange about it. "Sharp kid," he said, straightening up. He handed the Ankylosaurus back to Piper. "Good instincts on the taxonomy." Piper tucked the dinosaur back under her arm and returned to her booth. Stella's mother arrived at 6:45. No, 6:50. Stella was not tracking Roman Cahill's exact actions with any kind of precision, and took Piper home, and Stella finished the rest of service with a slightly unmoored feeling of someone who has seen something out of place and cannot figure out where it belongs. He asked her for coffee 3 weeks later, not at the restaurant. He left his number on a note under the bill, which was old-fashioned in a way she hadn't expected from him, and wrote only, "Coffee, if you want. No pressure." She told her mother about it on the phone that night, mostly because she needed to say it out loud to figure out how she felt about it. Her mother said, "Stella, honey, you are 33 years old and you work 2 jobs, and you raise a child alone, and you haven't had a single dinner with another adult in over a year. Have the coffee." She texted the number, "Sunday at 10, there's a place on Meridian." His response came back in under 2 minutes. "I'll be there." They had coffee at a place on Meridian Street that she'd been going to since she was in medical school, a small, crowded corner spot with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu and a barista who knew her order. Roman arrived 3 minutes early, which she noticed because she was 2 minutes early herself, and they sat across from each other with ceramic mugs and the slightly careful attention of 2 people who have decided to be honest with each other and aren't entirely sure where that will lead. "You're starting a new job soon," he said. Not a question. She'd mentioned it briefly, weeks ago, and he'd remembered. 6 days? Nervous? Yes. She didn't usually say yes to that. My last position ended badly. Layoffs. Not my performance, but still, it made me doubt myself in a way I'm not really used to. He nodded. "What's the specialty?" "Pediatrics. I did a fellowship in pediatric cardiology, but I moved back here when Piper was born, so I practice general now. It's better for the hours." Better for her. He was quiet for a moment, looking at his coffee. "I've been running a private equity fund out of Zurich for the last 9 years, he said. "I came back because my father's sick." He said it plainly, without the half-apology people usually wrapped around that kind of information. "I'm going to be here a while. I don't know exactly how long." Stella looked at him. She was very good at reading people. Years of pediatrics, years of talking to frightened parents, years of her own frightened parenting. And she read him now with care. He wasn't warning her off. He was telling her the truth and letting her decide what to do with it. She thought about Preston, about temporary and not quite right, and the restaurant and the laugh that still surfaced in her memory at odd moments, small and sharp. "I appreciate that," she said. "The honesty. I found it saves time." They stayed for 2 hours. She was back home before Piper woke up from her nap, and she sat in the quiet of her kitchen with the second cup of coffee she'd made for herself, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could name, like something that had been very tightly wound in her chest had loosened a single turn. She told almost no one. She told her mother because her mother had a sixth sense for these things, and would have found out anyway. She told her friend Dana because Dana was her oldest friend, and keeping things from her felt dishonest. She told no one else. Roman came to the restaurant twice more during her last 2 weeks of working there. He was exactly the same table, same bread, same quality of attention. Except now when she passed, there was a small specific warmth between them that she felt in her sternum and chose not to examine too closely. She finished her last shift on a Saturday and started at Northgate Pediatric on Monday morning, and she was terrified in the car ride over and had to sit in the parking garage for four minutes with her hands in her lap before she felt like herself again. She was good at her job. She had always been good at her job. She walked into that clinic, and she was Dr. Stella Marsh, and she was fine, better than fine. By Wednesday, she felt the old competence settling back into her bones like something returning home. She told Roman about it over dinner on Thursday. They'd been having dinner, now, actual dinners, with actual planning, while Piper was at her mother's, and he listened the way he always listened, with his full attention and no advice, and said, "I knew you would. You can't have known that. I've watched you carry a birthday cake through a room full of people who were being unkind to you," he said, "and light the candle, and smile, and mean it." He picked up his wine. "I knew." She looked at him for a moment. "You saw all of that. I see most things." It was not the first time she'd understood that Roman Cahill was not entirely what he presented, that there was more structure beneath the quiet surface of him, more reach and weight and consequence than a man who ordered salmon and sat in corners. She had understood it gradually, the way you understand a deep current underneath still water, not a sudden revelation, just a gradual comprehension. She had chosen, carefully and deliberately, not to be frightened of it. 2 months in, Piper decided she liked him. This was not a small thing. Piper had met Dana's boyfriend twice and referred to him exclusively as that man, with a skepticism usually reserved for people who put raisins in things. Piper had opinions, and she deployed them without ceremony, and Stella had learned to take them seriously. With Roman, Piper gave her ankylosaurus a second time. Voluntary surrender of the ankylosaurus was, Stella had come to understand, the highest possible honor available. He handled it correctly. He asked questions. He reported back on what he'd learned. She says the ankylosaurus would beat the tea. "Rex," Roman told Stella later, while Piper was in the other room. "She's been saying that for 6 months. She's right. The club tail could absolutely shatter a femur." Stella looked at this man standing in her kitchen in the particular afternoon light of a Sunday, discussing dinosaur combat mechanics with the earnestness of someone who had actually thought about it. She thought, "I am in serious trouble." She thought, "I'm okay with that." The morning the story broke, she found out the same way everyone else did. She was on her lunch break, eating a sandwich at her desk, half reading her phone, and she saw Roman's name in a business headline. Cahill Capital's acquisition of Northgate Health Systems confirmed. Roman Cahill named as principal investor. She put the sandwich down. She read it twice. Then she read the attached article, which was dense with financial language but contained, in the third paragraph, a detail that made the entire shape of the last 4 months rearrange itself in her mind. Northgate Health Systems. Northgate, which operated 16 facilities in the region. Northgate Pediatric Group, where she was currently sitting, eating her sandwich, 3 months into a job she had been so grateful and so frightened to begin. She sat with that information for a very long time. Then she called Roman. He answered on the second ring. "I just read the article," she said. A pause. Not the pause of someone caught. The pause of someone who had been waiting for this, who had known it was coming and had let it come on its own time. I know you own my clinic, the parent company, yes. I have no involvement in Roman. He stopped. Were you going to tell me? Another pause. Longer. Yes, he said. I was trying to figure out the right way. She looked at the wall of her office, at the framed print of a hummingbird she'd bought at a craft fair when Piper was 2, because Piper had loved it and said the bird was fast like her. When did you find out I worked here? About 3 weeks after we started seeing each other. She did the math. He'd known for 2 months. That's a long time. It is. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. She thought about the coffee on Meridian, and the dinners and Sunday afternoons in her kitchen, and Piper and her ankylosaurus, and the specific quality of attention he gave her that made her feel like someone was finally seeing the complete version of her, and not just the useful parts. She thought about Preston in a restaurant, deciding in half a second what would play best to the audience. These were not the same thing. She knew the difference. You need to tell me everything, she said. All of it. Whatever I don't know yet. Yes. Tonight. Yes. She picked up her sandwich. I have patience until 5:30. I'll be there at 6. She hung up the phone. She sat in the quiet of her office, with the hummingbird on the wall, and felt the precise sensation of being at the edge of something large and real, and she thought about what it meant to be seen. Not the clean, easy version of being seen, but the complicated version, the one that required you to let someone know all the inconvenient things, the flower on the apron, the parking garage, the paper towel tears, the 4-year-old with the ankylosaurus, who was the best and most terrifying thing she'd ever done. She had handed all of that to Roman Cahill, one small piece at a time, without fully realizing she was doing it. At 6:01, he knocked on her door. She opened it. He was standing on her porch in the same dark jacket, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked exactly as uncertain as she felt, which was somehow the most reassuring thing he'd ever shown her. I need you to understand something, he said, before she could speak. Come in, she said. We'll talk. He told her everything. It took a long time. The fund, the acquisition, the scope of what Northgate represented in a larger portfolio she had no frame of reference for. The deliberate compartmentalization that had been, he admitted, a mistake, in the context of the two of them specifically. He told her there was no conflict of interest in any formal sense. Her position existed independently. Her contract was separate, but that he understood why it felt like an ambush, and that he should have told her sooner, and that he was sorry. She listened the way she'd learned to listen, fully, without formulating her response while he was still speaking. Why didn't you tell me right away? She asked, when he was done. Because I didn't know what we were yet, he said, and I didn't want to make it strange before it had a chance to be something. And now? He looked at her steadily. Now I know exactly what it is, and I'm telling you. She had been a lot of things in her life. A medical student studying through 2 a.m., a new mother terrified in a hospital at 3 weeks postpartum, a doctor delivering news that no parent wanted to hear, a woman packing boxes in 3 trips and crying in a parking lot. She had been temporary, apparently. Not quite right. She had carried a birthday cake through a dining room and lit the candle and meant it. She said, I believe you. It was 6 months later, at a hospital fundraiser, a real one, catered, in a ballroom with actual chandeliers, that she saw Preston again. She was wearing the black dress, the good one. She'd finally found the occasion. Roman was beside her, which was not a secret. They'd been together long enough that people in her life knew, that Piper called him by his name and had informed him in grave detail about the migratory habits of the ankylosaur, but which was also not something she'd announced, because she was Stella Marsh and she'd always been private about the things that mattered. Preston saw her from across the room. She watched him do the thing he'd done in the restaurant, the quick read, the inventory, and she watched him land on Roman, which took him a second longer to process. She was aware that Roman was exactly the kind of person you needed a moment to process if you'd been thinking of her as someone manageable. Preston crossed the room. He was good at crossing rooms. Stella, he said warmly. He extended a hand to Roman. I'm Preston. I'm an old friend of Stella's, Roman Cahill. Roman shook his hand with the specific brevity of a man who had made a decision. She watched the name register on Preston's face. She could see him accessing it, placing it, arriving at the destination, and not quite believing he'd gotten there. Roman Cahill, Cahill Capital, the Northgate acquisition, which had been in the news for weeks. Preston started. Yes, Roman said pleasantly. Stella picked up her champagne glass. I didn't realize you two knew each other, Preston said. He was still smiling, but the quality of the smile had changed entirely. He looked at Stella now the way he had never looked at her when they were together, with real attention, the expensive kind, the kind that came too late. We're together, Stella said. She didn't say it to wound him. She said it because it was true and it was hers, and she was done being careful about the things that belonged to her. Preston said something gracious and excused himself and returned to his table, and Stella watched him go without any particular feeling, not triumph, not satisfaction, just the simple, clean awareness that a chapter had ended properly on its own terms. Roman touched the small of her back. You okay? She turned to look at him. At the man who sat in corners and watched rooms and crouched on restaurant floors to discuss ankylosaur taxonomy with her daughter. The man who had told her the truth and waited for her to decide what to do with it. Yeah, she said. More than. She meant it. She always meant it when it mattered.